In the night, thick snow blanketed the land of Miralis, and the wind howled in restless, circling gusts through the bare, ancient trees, making even the slightest sound echo back strangely, like the murmurs of a past that refused to rest. Darian moved slowly, step by careful step, his hands buried deep inside worn gloves, his eyes scanning every imprint on the surface of the snow, thin marks left by broken twigs, overlapping tracks of hungry predators, and also those long, unusual trails that some primal instinct in him insisted could not have belonged to any species he'd ever known. Each breath he exhaled turned into a mist that quickly vanished in the cold wind, yet his gaze never left the rusty steel traps, half buried in the snow, mute milestones marking every night he'd survived out here. The entire forest seemed frozen not just by winter, but by a loneliness that had lasted through many seasons. This space was cold not only because of the temperature, but also because of the absence of human warmth, a cold that seeped all the way to the marrow of Darian's bones, where loss lingered in him, stubborn and unhealed, like a wound that would never close. Each time he silently waded through the deep snow, the sound of his footsteps in the midnight forest brought back memories of a time when there was laughter, when firelight danced in the eyes of loved ones, before Miralis became a battlefield of genes and humanity was reduced to a hunted remnant. That night seemed destined to become another endless loop of cold and silence, until a groan pierced the darkness of the woods. The sound was strange, choked but not weak, unlike the cries of any animal or human Darian had ever heard. His breath caught, instincts sharpening as his hand closed tightly around the hilt of his plasma knife. His feet followed the sound automatically, every muscle in his body snapping awake after a long hibernation, not from any hope of rescuing someone, but out of that primal fear. On Miralis, anything at all could wear the face of death. Then he saw her, a thin, frail figure curled up on the snow, her skin a shimmering violet silver like the scar of a meteor slashing the sky, covered in bruises and blood that had not yet frozen. Her long blue-gray hair fell over half her face, hiding one cheek that was flecked with dried blood, and a deep cut running down her jawline. Her ankle was shackled by a strange electronic lock, blue symbols blinking in the icy snow, emanating an eerie kind of energy that Darian had never encountered in his rough old human life. Her breath was labored, her lips a purplish blue, parted just enough to let out stuttering sounds, one hand clutching her chest, the other shivering, drawing the torn fabric tighter around her. For a moment, Darian considered walking away. Every survival lesson he'd ever learned told him, anything whose origin is unclear is best avoided. Yet, in his eyes, in that storm of cold, the image was both unfamiliar and so cruel it haunted him. No one was abandoned like that in a dead forest unless they had been stripped of the right to live, and that, more than anything, kept him from turning away. With the steady calm of someone who had seen death too often, Darian knelt down slowly. Every movement was measured, the blue plasma blade in his hand not just a rescue tool but a weapon ready for anything that might turn into a trap. As he slid the blade over the lock, a small spark leapt up, heat seeping into his fingertips, and in that moment he could hear the fierce thud of his own heart. The lock popped open, and Senya let out a barely audible moan, then fell silent. Darian slid his strong arms beneath her frail body, lifting her from the snow. Not light, not easy, for every touch of her icy skin sent a strange jolt up his spine, both a warning and an awakening of something primitive, instinctive in every cell. He brought the girl back to his cabin without a word. Outside, the wind howled and the thick snow quickly erased their footprints, while inside, Darian carefully laid Senya down on an old cot by the fire. The flames crackled, sending golden sparks onto the soot-stained wooden ceiling, illuminating every contour of her unfamiliar body. The purple bruises on her silver skin, her long fingers tipped with faintly pointed nails, veins pulsing beneath her surface with every weak breath. He covered her with a blanket, forcing himself to maintain a respectful distance. But he couldn't suppress the growing curiosity and the inexplicable thrill building inside him. It wasn't just that she was so strangely beautiful, but that all her differences, her fragility and her strength, her almost human yet utterly alien features, were deeply alluring. As the fire gradually warmed the room, Senya let out a soft groan, her lips cracked and moving without sound. Darian steeled himself and prepared the only hot soup he had left in his meager rations. The salty scent of meat drifted through the air, blending with the faint aroma of burnt fabric from his old jacket drying by the stove. When he came closer, she opened her eyes, violet dark and reflecting the flames with an unnatural glint, a look that pierced through all his caution. It was not the look of someone begging for rescue, but something that was at once provocative and defiant, the gaze of a wounded warrior who would accept no pity. Her voice, raspy, broke the silence. "If you want to kill me, why not just do it now?" Darian replied, his tone flat, betraying no emotion. "I don't kill those who have already been left for dead." She curled her lip in a half-sneer, half-snarl. "I'm not human, are you blind?" The words hung in the cramped little room, a sharp line drawn, not just between human and alien, but between two survivors who had lost faith in anything but themselves. Senya lay there, her eyes never leaving Darian. Slowly, she lifted her hand to wipe the dried blood from her mouth, every movement filled with a stubborn pride. Even with her body nearly paralyzed, she looked at him with the fierce spirit of one who would not bow. Her pale purple lips trembled in the cold, but her eyes, silver bright in the firelight, burned with an unyielding vitality, as if a storm raged inside her that no one could ever tame. Darian left the cabin for a while, checking the window, reinforcing the boards, considering every exit in case this girl suddenly became a threat. But when he returned and found Senya still silent, her gaze sparkling with unbroken vigilance yet no longer as weak as when she'd been buried in the snow, he knew. She was something far beyond any notion of weakness. In that moment, a different feeling passed through Darian, not pity, but a respect laced with the thrill of challenge. Part of him understood that from the moment he set foot on Miralis, the world no longer divided cleanly between human and alien. Out here in the wild, only those strong enough, stubborn enough, were worthy of survival. And Senya, whatever she truly was unmistakably one of them. The fire crackled, its shifting light shimmering on Senya's blue-gray hair, glinting off her high cheekbones and the bruises at her throat, composing a strange portrait, fragile and dangerous, beautiful almost to the point of unreality. The tiny cabin seemed to shrink into its own closed world, where all the rules from outside fell away. Here, between Darian and Senya, only tension remained, the urge to survive, and some invisible thread beginning to vibrate. The bond of two outcasts who, though left behind, had never once accepted defeat. The first 2 days passed like a tense game between the last survivors of two worlds, every moment wound tight with a silent current neither could name. The tiny cabin, an island of warmth in the snowbound sea of Miralis, seemed just large enough to save a strange creature's life, yet far too cramped to hide from the senses and instincts of two beings honed for survival. Each morning, as pale white light slipped through the cracks of the wooden door, Senya sat curled against the wall across from the dinner table, knees drawn up close to her chest, both hands wrapped tightly around the warm cup of water that Darian prepared for her. Her long fingers, nails tinged with a violet pearl sheen, tapped softly on the rim of the cup in the rhythm of private thoughts no one but her could ever decipher. Her eyes were ever restless, roaming from the spare lock on the door to the hook holding Darian's knife, to the jar of sea salt, to the lone button on Darian's old shirt draped over the back of a chair, and even the scratch marks left by animal claws on the firewood stacked by the stove. Every time Darian passed by, his strong arm flickering through the golden halo of the oil lamp, Senya would lift her gaze, those silver-violet eyes tracking his every movement, not with the gratitude of someone who owed her life, but with the fierce vigilance of a warrior cornered, ready to fight back with her last breath. Yet in those fleeting moments when their eyes met, there was something softer, a deep curiosity neither fully understood, lingering behind Senya's defenses. Darian, experienced as he was in suspicion and self-preservation, could feel the air between them thickening hour by hour. He kept his distance. When preparing food, he would carefully place the canned goods at the edge of the table, then step back toward the door, always avoiding accidental contact, even avoiding the kind of eye contact that might ignite something dangerous between two beings so different. And yet at night, as Senya curled up on the thin mattress by the fire, her slender shoulders trembling gently beneath the worn blanket, Darian never really slept deeply. He sat quietly by the window, hand tracing the handle of a dulled axe, eyes lost to the darkness outside, but his ears always tuned to the faint sounds behind him, the softest of breaths, the whisper of fabric dragging over wood, and sometimes the uneven thud of his own heart at the thought that Senya was there, just a single reach away. Senya did not merely observe the cabin, she could smell the air itself. Whenever Darian moved closer, she detected the distinctive scent of human, the salt of his sweat, blending with the smoky aroma of burning wood, the faintest musk of wild animal grease lingering on his old coat, and something else, something so raw, so alive and primal that no Aelthyr would ever possess. That strange, enticing scent agitated her. The more she tried to ignore it, the more her instincts responded. Sometimes, she'd catch herself staring at the veins on Darian's wrist as he split wood, or tracking the slow movement of his muscles beneath that threadbare gray sweater when he stooped to stoke the fire. At night, the firelight reflected in her blue-gray hair, casting a glowing aura around her, so much so that Darian found himself glancing back at her, longer than he needed to. Neither spoke much. On occasion, Senya would share snippets of stories, a passing mention of gene checks, of the Aelthyr Council where every individual was registered, of the breeding duty with alphas she had refused. Every time she brushed past her past, she tried to sound indifferent, but Darian could see a flicker of sadness at the corner of her eye, and he would ask no further. On Miralis, he understood, everyone carried scars no one else could reach. Senya recovered faster than any human, thanks to her alien physiology, though sometimes she had to grit her teeth and endure the sharp pains from unstable enzymes. One afternoon, as Darian was repairing the lock on the door, Senya hovered silently behind him, her gaze torn between doubt and admiration, whispering, "Why do you live in a place like this, all alone?" Darian didn't answer at first. He kept his back to her, tightening the screws, then let the wrench fall with a sigh. No one survives war and stays whole. Senya understood that better than any words could say. That night beneath the thin blanket near the fire, Senya curled up, feeling every heartbeat as she listened to Darian's footsteps circling the room, the crack of dry wood snapping, then the dull thud of the stove door closing. She tried to sleep, but every sense was alive. The smell of cinders, the scent of human skin, the crisp tang of melting snow on Darian's clothes, all blended into an aroma she could only find delicious in her weakest, most primal state. Now and then, she'd tilt her head, watching Darian as he arranged traps by the door, his wide shoulders square in the flickering firelight, damp hair falling over his brow, a stubbled jaw sharpening the strong lines of a face no longer young. Whenever Darian caught her eye, he only looked back for a heartbeat, just long enough to sense in her not only the scrutiny of a fellow fighter but a smoldering curiosity, an unnamed tremor, both fragile and stubborn. The physical gap between them was just a few meters, but it felt as though some invisible thread stretched ever tighter, one touch, and both their worlds might shatter. Those 2 days, the cabin was less a shelter than a natural laboratory for instinct. In the dim light, breaths mingled, and whenever Darian brushed close, laying a blanket, bringing water, Senya felt her veins warm uncontrollably. For all her effort at coldness and caution, her body still responded to his presence. Once, as Darian handed her the first aid kit, his hand grazed her cold knuckles. Just an instant, but it sent a jolt up her spine, making her stifle a gasp, drawing the blanket tighter to conceal a shiver that was equal parts anxiety and temptation. Darian was no less affected. Each time he saw Senya watching him, lips parted, skin glowing in the fire's reflection, he found his own breathing heavier. He knew this cabin was more than refuge. It had become a cage holding two predators, daring each other to see which thread would snap first. The logic of man or the instincts of a species nearly driven extinct. On the second night, as the wind howled stronger, Darian feigned sleep, eyes half open, ears straining for every tiny movement from Senya's blanket. Sometimes he heard her shift closer to the fire, her breath deepening, as if neither of them dared sleep soundly with a stranger nearby. Savior and threat rolled into one. Yet it was in these silent moments that they grew closer than any words could make them, simply by the shared thrum of hearts, breath, and the scent of warm bodies in a cramped space, isolated from the weight of rules and prejudice beyond. The Miralis cabin, in those first stifling days of uneasy coexistence, witnessed not only the slow revival of an abandoned body, but also the quiet birth of an unstoppable emotional storm. As two souls, two species, both lost and alone, found each other through the oldest survival instincts, and through the aching desire to be understood, to be felt, to hold the warmth of another being, knowing full well that a single touch might collapse every border they'd ever known. On the third night, as Miralis shook beneath the shrieking wind and thick pillars of snow threatened to bury the ancient forest, Senya forced herself out of the cabin, intending only to gather some clean snow to warm for drinking. But as soon as she stepped onto the porch, her knees buckled and her body slid along the dew-slick wooden boards, her breath shallow and rapid, unable to fill her lungs. Darian, moving instinctively from the kitchen, rushed to her side, his strong arms wrapping around Senya's nearly limp form, feeling a strange heat radiate from her skin, a heat that was not fever, not illness, but something that burned from within, wild and haunting. The moment his hand touched her, it was as if a spark shot along his bones, part warning, part irresistible pull, dissolving every self-protective instinct he had left. Senya opened her eyes, sweat beading into thin lines on her temple, lips parted with effort, her gaze flickering with a pale violet light that glowed faintly beneath her skin, as though her whole body was wrapped in the fragile aura of a being that refused to bow to nature. "Don't touch me, I'm about to enter wild cycle," she choked out, her voice a confessional whisper, part warning, part desperation. Darian, though he'd seen countless things beyond reason on Miralis, had never witnessed anything so raw, so primal, a creature so utterly fragile, now on the brink of becoming the epicenter of all that was vital and alive. He carried her back into the cabin, uncaring of the cold snow clinging to his cuffs. In the cramped space, even a single draft of wind through the door made them shudder. Yet that chill was soon overpowered by the heat radiating from Senya, seeping into the air as a moist, intoxicating haze, the scent of alien skin mingling with burning wood and the musty undertones of old timber. Darian set Senya down on the mattress by the fire. Even after he let go, his hand still tingled from the sensation of her glowing skin. The room felt changed. Air thickened. Every breath seemed to carry the taste of desire itself, as if invisible pheromones rolled through in waves, invading every sense and driving his heart to a frantic pace. Darian's head buzzed, his throat dry, his skin hypersensitive, and every small movement from Senya, even just a lift of her hand or a twist of her body, was enough to set his entire world trembling. He forced himself to sit back, focusing on the fire, but her scent coiled through the air, persistent, haunting, impossible to ignore. Senya fared no better. She bit her lip, clutching the blanket, her body shivering violently not from cold, but from the surging force of enzyme overload. She knew too well she was at the edge of control. Layers of pheromone drowning all reason, compelling her to seek physical contact, to find true bonding with a compatible species, or else her body would revolt, her cells self-destructing, and she would die before she could call for help. Darian watched Senya, noticing the subtle changes in each breath, each shift of her expression. Her eyes grew unfocused, glistening with tears, but her pupils narrowed sharply whenever she looked at him, like a wild animal both terrified and ravenous. Beneath her tattered clothes, her skin emitted a soft glow, veins showing as purple lines along her neck, breath merging with the pulse of the fire, her heartbeat drumming like thunder in the heavy air. Senya struggled to speak, her words fractured between sharp breaths. "If you don't help me stabilize this instinct, I'll die from gene shock." She didn't plead, didn't beg, she simply offered the raw truth of her species. A wild cycle that wasn't completed through bonding, without the exchange of enzyme and pheromone through mating, would send her body's defenses into chaos, destroying her from the inside out. In that moment, Darian's reason nearly dissolved. He knew he stood at the threshold between instinct and will. On one side, the urge to protect, to fully experience this extraordinary being. On the other, the fear that giving in would mean losing the last vestiges of his old humanity. But another voice echoed within him, the same that had driven him to save her in the snowy forest. On Miralis, only those who dare cross the line survive. The air in the cabin seemed to freeze in place. The firelight painted Senya's silver skin with an enchanting glow. Every time she curled in on herself, arching her back and gasping for breath, the sound merged with the wind's howl outside, and Darian felt his own body tense, every muscle trembling with a desire he could no longer hide. He didn't remember when he had moved closer, only that when he looked down, his hand was resting on Senya's forehead, feeling the heat trace down her spine and into his own soul. Senya didn't shy away. She turned to him, eyes locked, lips trembling open. "I'm not begging," she whispered, "but you're the only choice. Not because of Jean, not because of the council, but because you saved me when everything else turned its back." Darian's hands, rough and warm, caressed her cheek for the first time. Her skin was softer than anything he could imagine, both cool and burning, as if it held both ice and the kind of fire that only flares at the end of the world. Their breaths mingled, hearts racing, the scent of Senya's pheromones intensifying, blurring every boundary in Darian's mind. He leaned down, pressing his lips gently to her forehead, pausing, his gaze seeking that last sign of consent. Senya closed her eyes, her trembling hand slipping beneath his collar, pulling him closer. No words were needed, only the beating of hearts, the mingling of breath and scent, a symphony of survival and longing, where every touch hovered between life and death, between human and alien, between salvation and surrender to instinct. In that small space, they came together not out of mere lust, but in an ancient ritual of life, bonding, exchanging enzyme, mingling pheromones, saving a being from death, and in the process, saving what was left of humanity in one who had lost everything. That night, the tiny Miralis cabin witnessed a fire that would not be extinguished, and in those ashes, a new life, a connection surpassing all limits of biology and feeling, began to form. Senya, trembling, dragged herself to Darian's side, every movement heavy with the desperate resolve known only to those who realized that any more hesitation would mean losing everything forever. Her silver-violet eyes were no longer cold. Instead, they blazed with a mix of fire and breaking waves, a tumultuous blend of the terror of losing herself, the despair of standing at death's threshold, and a suffocating survival instinct burning through her very being. In the flickering firelight, beads of sweat traced down Senya's cheek, catching the light in pale purple streaks, adding strange new marks to skin that seemed never to belong in this world. She looked up, breathing hard, lips trembling. Her words, no longer sharp, spilled out honest and raw, stripped of all disguise. "If you agree, I will become pregnant, but no council will ever be able to trace the child because it will carry the genes of freedom. I choose you, not for your genes, but because you are the only one who saved me without asking for anything." The words fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the wind battering the windows and the pounding hearts of two people with nothing left to lose. Darian said nothing. His gaze softened, carrying within it both empathy and an old pain no one else could understand. He reached out, slowly brushing sweaty locks from Senya's forehead, feeling the feverish heat radiating from her flesh. A sultry, humid warmth intimately familiar to anyone who has stood at the edge of life and death. Senya grabbed his wrist, pulling him close as if terrified that, if she let go, she herself would vanish into the air. Her slim shoulders shook, whether from the cold seeping into the cabin or from emotion, instinct, desire. It all welled up at once, merging until nothing could be distinguished anymore. They looked at each other in a silence so dense it became hard to breathe. No words were enough, and no barrier strong enough to separate two lonely souls, two bodies shattered by the hunger to belong. Only their mingled breath, racing heartbeats, and uncontrollable heat passed through every fingertip, each touch that seemed accidental but was, in truth, salvation. Darian bent down, his lips brushing the fevered skin of Senya's cheek, then tracing to her parched lips, gentle and silent, a wordless plea for permission to cross every line ever drawn between human and alien. Senya exhaled, a faint moan escaping her lips, her hands slipping under Darian's collar to pull him closer, pressing her face to his chest to hear the heartbeat of a being she once believed she could never trust. They toppled onto the mattress by the stove, Senya's skin glowing in the dark, faint purple light sparkling up her neck, over her chest, down her back, like a miniature galaxy bursting with pleasure and release. Darian, with both hands, cradled her fragile, burning body, feeling every muscle quiver, every gasp and panting breath locked together in an atmosphere thick with pheromones. There was no distance left, everything became one. The crackle of the fire, the howl of the wind, the slap of skin on skin, the crushing embrace, the deep, mindless kisses, every sensation pushed to the very limit. Darian's body, solid and hot, enveloped Senya's fragile form ablaze. He cherished her not just as a man cherishes a woman, but as if saving some lost fragment of his own soul. Every time their lips found each other, Senya felt the enzymes within her calming, softening, blending into a new shared blood flow, into the river of new life just awakening. Their short, hoarse moans, the twisting of bodies by instinct and ecstasy, drowned out the wind's roar outside, silenced all fear of councils and rules, of the past and of all that was yet to come. That night every distance disappeared, leaving only two beings tangled together, exploring each other's uncharted tenderness, leaving traces in sweat, tears, breath, and the silent communion of freedom and fate. They mated not only to save one life, but to make a declaration to the world outside. The right to choose, to love, to survive, belongs to anyone, human or alien, hunted or conqueror. Every movement, every breath, every merging moment between Darian and Senya became the most primal symphony, where every fear was burned away, every wound soothed. And for the first time, neither of them felt alone or abandoned on a frozen planet. The night stretched on, the storms outside reduced to a distant soundtrack for the moment when two fates chose survival on their own terms, seeking neither recognition nor fearing any more to be controlled. At dawn, when the first light crept through the cracks, settling on Senya's silver skin and Darian's deep-set eyes, they were still entwined, their lingering warmth proof of the miracle two lost souls had created. A free choice made in a world where nothing was certain but loneliness. And somewhere between their still thundering hearts, a new life was beginning, bearing all the hope, the instincts, the longing, and the right to choose of both their species, who had once thought they could never reach one another. When the first light of day pierced through the heavy clouds and the frost-fogged glass, the little cabin on Miralis no longer trembled from the storm. Snow draped around the slanted roof in soft white blankets, reflecting the pale yellow of the northern sun, as if the world outside had been purified of all the fears left behind by the night. Inside the old wooden room, Senya was curled in Darian's arms, her head nestled against his chest, her slender hand resting lightly on his side, her breath even and deep, as if this single moment truly belonged to both of them. Senya opened her eyes, her gaze softened in a way so different from the guarded coldness of the days before. Now, her eyes held gratitude, emotion, and a touch of indescribable peace. Her hair was a tangled mess across Darian's shoulder, old beads of sweat now faded to a pink flush on her silver cheek. Outside, the wind shrieking had died, replaced only now and then by the faint tap of snow on the roof and the tentative calls of strange birds through the white, frozen forest. It was a morning with no more threat, no more panic, just the shared warmth of two bodies wrapped together after a night surviving pure instinct. She squeezed Darian's arm a little tighter, feeling the heat of his skin against the biting cold of the storm-washed morning. In a barely audible voice, as if afraid the words might shatter the dream, Senya whispered, "Thank you, not just for saving me, but for letting me be a person, letting me choose." That simple phrase carried all the liberation she'd never known in her life, a freedom not granted by anyone else, but one she had to seize for herself. For the first time since being hunted by the Aelthir Council, Senya truly felt she was an individual, not just a gene machine, not a tagged asset, but a being with the right to choose, the right to love, the right to exist in her own way. Darian smiled softly, his eyes filled with tenderness and worry all at once. His hand slid gently over Senya's flat belly, slow and careful, as if to protect something fragile and precious about to come into this world. He said nothing, only let his fingers glide over her cool skin, feeling the racing heartbeat of the alien girl who had transformed his entire life in just one night. In the pale morning light, their bodies entwined as if they'd always been meant to find each other at the frozen edge of the world. But peace on Miralis never lasted long. Beyond the frosted window on the blank white snow, the chaos of new tracks began to appear, not the paw prints of wild animals, but heavy boot prints, spaced in formation, pressing deep toward the cabin. A broken branch, a few scattered feathers, gouges in the ice as if from metal claws, all signs of a professional hunting party. The space outside was so still it felt as though the sky itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to strike. Senya sat up the moment she spotted the first signs, the warrior's instinct snapping awake inside her. She no longer looked like a fragile survivor, but radiated the sharp resolve of a creature bred for resistance, prepared to risk her last chance to live. Her hand flicked the blanket aside, grabbed her tattered shirt, pulled it around her shoulders, and she stood with the posture of someone trained since childhood for every threat and pursuit. She checked the wound on her shoulder, gritted her teeth at the pain shooting down her arm, but her legs were steady, resolute, as if nothing on earth could break her will now. Darian was fully awake as well, moving quickly, scanning every corner of the cabin, ears attuned to the faintest sound outside, a man who'd lived too long with danger. He pulled on his thick jacket, checked the weapon beneath the table, opened the drawer for battered plasma rounds, loaded his sidearm. No need for words, just a glance at Senya and both understood. Peace was over. Now they had to survive for each other, for the life just beginning in her womb. He threw together a makeshift defense, chairs and tables braced against the door, bare traps hidden in the snow, shards of glass scattered on the step. Everything that could be used was transformed into a weapon to slow down the relentless pursuit. Senya swiftly tied back her hair, wrapped Darian's metal wire around her shoulders, her eyes glinting with icy resolve. "If they come, don't waste yourself trying to save me. Just protect the child, just preserve its freedom at any cost." Darian looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, his gaze unable to hide admiration and love. That moment, when Senya and Darian stood side by side, preparing for battle, with life and love balanced on the razor's edge between loss and hope, instinct and will, was the true birth of freedom. No longer did they belong to any council, no longer marked as gene slaves, no longer abandoned or hunted. They were themselves, the last choice for each other, the only hope for a future no one else dared to dream. Outside, the gray sky of Miralis seemed to sink deeper into the hush of earth and sky before a new storm. But this time, amid all lurking dangers, they were not alone. Freedom, even if only a fleeting moment, had become eternal in the hearts of those bold enough to live, to love, and to carve out their own path. Snow began falling thickly again, blurring all sight into swirling white walls that closed in around the tiny cabin lost in the wilds of Miralis. The hunting squad moved in silence, black shadows gliding along the forest's edge like ancient beasts, every step heavy and cold, leaving perfect circles in the snow that led directly to where Senya and Darian hid. Outside, the air was thick with mist, laced with the ozone stench of energy weapons and the cold iron tang of battle armor. The gloomy sky pressed down, crushing every hurried breath inside the cabin. Senya pressed her back to the wall, breath coming out in thin mist, gripping the sharp shard of metal Darian had fashioned, her eyes alight with an unbreakable resolve. She was no longer a wounded fugitive, but a warrior ready to sacrifice everything, even herself, if only to protect the fragile life just beginning to grow inside her. Beside her, Darian checked every old plasma round, loaded his weapon with hands hardened by years of survival, his gaze sweeping every exit. He didn't speak, but one glance was enough for both to know. This fight was no longer about their own survival, but about preserving the freedom of a new generation. The moment the first footsteps crunched on the thick snow outside the door, all their senses snapped awake. Senya darted to the entrance, her slender body moving like a violet streak, so fast human eyes would see only a flash through the fog. With her remaining strength, she launched herself at the intruder, bringing him down with a masterful chokehold, hot blood splattering crimson across the white snow. Darian wasted no time, firing 2 shots at the next attacker, the sharp cracks echoing through the midnight forest. Snow flew up in huge clumps under their boots, the smell of blood spreading in the icy air. Every move, every time they pressed back to back, Senya and Darian became a death duet. Differences of species, genes, even primal fear seemed to vanish, replaced by perfect trust between 2 souls who had chosen to believe in each other at the edge of danger. In the fog, Senya's silhouette darted like a sliver of moonlight, tearing the dark, blue-gray hair flying, blood dripping from her shoulder, but her eyes still blazing with the fire of life. Darian, his back guarding hers, muscles straining to shield her from every blow, breath ragged, the heat of their skin blending with Miralis's cold, until instinct itself became something neither of them had ever known. But then, as the fight seemed nearly won, a soldier crept up from behind, the glint of a knife flashing coldly. Senya spun too quickly, tried to kick the enemy down, but the deep wound in her side sent her collapsing, blood soaking the rags of her shirt. Her genes went into shock, enzymes in her blood spinning out of control, heartbeat skittering wildly, her breathing turning into sharp, painful spasms. Darian was there instantly, scooping Senya from the frozen ground, pressing hard on her bleeding wound. He ran through the chaos, slamming the cabin door behind them as the last barricade protecting their fragile future. Senya curled in his arms, every muscle taut with pain, cold sweat breaking out on her brow, her eyes dazed and glassy. I can't anymore, she gasped, breath choppy, enzymes blazing inside her veins, pushing them to the brink with no way back. Darian understood. Now it wasn't medicine or machines. Only the ancient bonding ritual of the Aether could pull Senya back from the biological storm. He laid her by the fire, her body trembling under his touch, their breaths merging, nothing left but the drive to survive. In the flickering firelight, he kissed her forehead, whispering the smallest words of encouragement, a silent vow that he would not let go, no matter how the world outside tried to kill what miracle they had created. Senya clung to Darian, her whole being swept up in the wild current of enzyme overload. In that moment, all reason evaporated, only instinct, feeling, the blending of two souls from distant worlds bound by the same hunger for life, the same fierce need to protect the freedom growing inside her. Darian stroked Senya's back, feeling each shudder, each spasm of pain, every touch both a rescue and a rope tying their fates tighter together, binding them with a primal harmony of survival, desire, and the oldest kind of love. They entwined beneath battered blankets, his warmth sinking into her, their sweat, blood, and tears merging into a scent that would never fade. Each embrace, each brush of lips on skin, every moan of pain and pleasure soothed Senya's shock, slowly drawing her back from the edge. It was no longer just making love. It was a survival right, a union deeper than any council or gene code could ever hope to break. Darian held Senya as if cradling the whole world, whispering words that only those who had weathered such a biological storm could understand. When the enzymes finally calmed, Senya's heartbeat slowed to a steady rhythm, and she lay curled in his arms, eyes shimmering with tears, a weary, satisfied smile hovering on her lips. They both knew their moment had saved not just a life, but the very freedom of a new generation about to be born. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing all traces of the battle, leaving only the little cabin glowing warm from the fire of life they'd sparked. In the hearts of these two survivors, freedom was no longer an idea far away. It had become flesh, a sacred power that no one could impose on, control, or divide. They had crossed every boundary, and in that space between, two once-lost souls had become one new choice, a symbol for a future no force could ever extinguish. Across miles and miles of white, snow-covered land, the final days of winter on Miralis stretched before Senya and Darian as a journey without a map, with only their thin footprints trailing toward a pale gray horizon. The north wind whipped down the sides of the mountains, curling up from icy ravines, wrapping around their staggered forms and casting faint shadows across the frozen expanse. Every step they took left behind a trace that the falling snow would slowly erase. But ahead, the north, the whispered land of gene freedom, where rebel communities had made their sanctuary, grew ever clearer in the determination of two survivors. On Darian's shoulder was an old backpack containing all that remained of their lives. A few clothes, strips of bandage, a loaded plasma gun, and the last bit of dried food from the cabin. Senya, pregnant, walked with determined pride, each movement radiating the dignity of someone who had chosen her own fate. Her eyes shone beneath her scarf, the silver-violet skin of her Aelthir heritage glowing even more vividly against the cold white snow. When night fell quickly, they pitched their tent among the rocks, lying close to share warmth, breaths mingling, Darian's hand resting lightly on Senya's belly each night, feeling the delicate, fierce new life within, a miracle that no power but love and the yearning for freedom could create. The road north was not just an escape, but a true rebirth for two fates once crushed and stripped of any belief in the meaning of existence in a cold universe. At times, they encountered other groups, refugee aliens, or rebel stragglers moving the opposite way, each carrying in their eyes a mingling of caution and hope. Rumors about a freedom-blooded pair, a human and an Aelthir warrior who had defied the council, began to spread, stirring a belief that the generational chains of gene slavery might soon be broken. Senya and Darian rarely spoke of the losses left behind, nor did they comfort themselves with easy dreams. Each morning, as the sun carved a thin streak of light over the mountains, Senya gazed into the distance, quietly counting the beats of her heart and the tiny kicks of the unborn child in her belly. That life was the most vivid proof of freedom, a being not controlled, not branded, not belonging to any council or system, but to the choices of its mother and father. Every night as the cold wind slipped under their thin blankets, Darian held Senya close, his eyes now clear of old worry, lit instead with a new resolve. He knew that every danger ahead was worth facing, so long as they could hold on to this choice, this right to survive and to love, whatever the cost. Sometimes Senya would whisper in the silent midnight, her breath a warm mist on Darian's neck. If this child is born, it will prove that freedom can begin with a single, small choice. All we need is to dare to love, to survive, to resist. Darian never replied, only squeezed her hand, sharing with her all the warmth and strength of his wordless faith. He knew that, at the very end of the world, two outcasts had made themselves a torch to light the way for others. Those souls long imprisoned by genes, by rules, by hatred and fear. One day, as the sky turned deep blue and the first new snow of the season fell across their shoulders, Senya looked toward the misty horizon, where mountain peaks dissolved into pale sunlight. Her belly now pressed against her thick coat, each step slower but stronger, her eyes sparkling with the vision of a future free from chains, unscarred by the past. Darian, always at her side, sometimes glanced over, his gaze now holding no shadow. In that silent moment among the snowy woods, they both knew they had crossed every border, not just of species, but of their own fear and longing to be truly alive. In the north, where tales of a gene-freedom land had become the sworn hope of rebel communities, the figures of these two survivors, a human, an alien, and an unborn child with an untraceable hybrid bloodline, became a living symbol of new hope. No power, no council would ever again control the future, so long as people dared to love, to defend one another, and to choose freedom for themselves. Under the gray Miralis sky, in the blinding white of late-season snow, Darian held Senya's hand, never looking away from the road ahead. The future was still full of danger, still heavy with unseen threats, but it had never before shone with such vivid, powerful hope. And there, love born from instinct, forged through trial, transcending all the rules of their species, was the only flame strong enough to light a new world.